Hello, I'm Shankar.
And I'm Nikhil. This is Chai Across Generations. Hey Shankar, how was your Father's Day?
Great. My daughter and I shared a lovely lunch together and some special time hiking and talking about how our relationship is evolving over the years and this year in particular. How was your Father's Day, Nikhil?
It was also great. I got to spend some quality time with my dad between some good food. My dad came on last week for a Father's Day interview, and we also spent some time chatting about how it was nice to have a long, meaningful conversation between the two of us. For anyone who hasn't heard it yet, you can go back and check it out. It's the previous episode, episode 19. And although Father's Day is now technically over, we've got another special father child conversation coming up today from a slightly different angle. This is episode 20, Father's Day, Father and Daughter.
Yes, I sat down with my daughter Shivani and she interviewed me about several topics, including what it was like to be a single dad, my biggest challenge as a father, and advice for new fathers.
Yeah, I love the conversation that you all are about to hear. There's something so special in the relationship between fathers and daughters that really comes through in the conversation. I'm so glad that you two were able to share a window into your lives with us.
Thanks, Nikhil. Yes, you'll hear my conversation with Shivani on this episode, and we'll come back at the end to wrap things up. Here we go. So, for this Father's Day episode, we're going to switch things up a bit. I'm here with my daughter Shivani, who will be interviewing me today. How are you, Shivani?
I'm good, Dad. Excited to be on the podcast today.
That's great. Nikhil has mentioned often that it would be nice to have you on the podcast to balance two guys talking all the time. And I've been looking forward to having you on the podcast too. So it's nice to finally have you here now that you're back in the country after your study away in Tanzania. Would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes. My name is Shivani, and I grew up in Iowa. I'm a rising senior in college, majoring in environmental studies and minoring in politics. I'm really into dance and reading great books. Are you ready for me to ask you some hard hitting questions now?
Okay, fire away.
Okay, starting off strong. According to you, what does being a good father mean?
Wow, that's a big question. And I'll try to answer it as best as I can. So, I think the very basic part is, of course, physical presence, a nurturing presence, a protective presence. I think it's very important for a father to play those roles, provide security, safety, every kind of physical support, etc. And then also to, I believe, inspire by example, to intellectually stimulate you, to challenge a child to grow, and to also be there when, say, the child stumbles or falls. So to be a strong support at all times. But I think the biggest part is actually, which I think fathers may not always be aware of, is to be an emotional support and to provide a very steady, warm glow of affection that never wavers. It's like a lamp in an undisturbed place. It's just this unshakable stream of support. And I honestly think there is one last duty of a father, I believe, and that is to explain to the child the father's own journey on the spiritual path and to explain what challenges the father faced, what doubts, what other kinds of challenges that might have cropped up, their own periods of lack of faith, but then ultimately how they chose, how their life itself is an example of choosing faith in some way. And I think when you do that, then it actually gives the child the chance to very in a personal, individual way, choose their own faith, which could be different, but one hopes that, the essential elements do pass on. So I think that's the final, but probably the most important part of being a good father.
I see. I think often we get our conception of being a father from our own fathers. So, what do you feel your father taught you about being a dad?
I think he really didn't talk about it, but he sort of showed by example, by doing, and that was very useful. I knew that he was very concerned and interested in our welfare at all times. I knew that he always had the best intentions and that he had the highest and the best desires for our success and happiness. And I knew that sort of the Hindu traditions meant a lot to him, the Vedic tradition, and he did an outstanding job in trying to instruct me as best as he could. Although I felt at times it was rather heavy handed and hard to follow, but I nonetheless got a lot of good. I mean, much that I know I did learn at his knee, if you will. And I think he was also a very stable presence in our lives. He could be a lot of fun, and he used to joke around with us, and he took us for various outings, and so all that was nice. Although he had a very, very, very busy working life, and it was a very hard working life. There was a lot of physical hardship. He had to travel, just going to work in really inclement weather in India on a motorcycle, and yet I could see that he lived his life essentially for the family, and that was a powerful, powerful lesson.
Wow. Yeah. Well, coming to you specifically, you raised me as a single father. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, I think it was in some ways easier and liberating because I had my own space in which I could transmit to you what I thought was important. It was very hard in some ways. I think I missed a lot of the contact time. So, we basically had visitation every other weekend at one point. So it was basically we went about 4 days out of 30 in the school semester or the school year. And then, of course, we had about 6 weeks in the summer and then breaks and stuff. So I think being a single dad, the hard part was not seeing you enough. And I think actually dropping you off in the first couple of years on Sundays was the hardest thing. Some of the hardest times in my life. But I think the good part of it was it gave us a lot of quality time. And we had a very peaceful and a serene atmosphere at home. And I could sort of parent you in a very consistent way that I think you felt.
Yeah.
There were some things I had to do. I had to step in and play the role of a mom in many ways, which was interesting. As you know, I like to cook, and you look forward to my cooking.
You are a very good cook.
So you often would, we'd make all kinds of food. You liked Indian food, but I also make pancakes and stuff like that. I think there was a lot of arts and crafts that we did together, mobiles and things like that. And I think at one point, we also had this habit of having an oil bath on, was it Saturdays or Sundays?
I think it was Sundays.
Sundays.
I remember those.
So that was the ritual where I'd wake you up, and this is the South Indian style of giving an oil bath. So it involved coconut oil in your hair, and you had long, thick black hair. And I remember that we had a whole collection of these, sea creatures like crabs and
Oh my gosh.
ducky. And remember?
Where are those?
Well, I know they had to be cleaned often because of the oil bath. They'd get oil on them and they get grody, so I had to scrub them too. And some of them had sort of these internal cavities which would fill up with water. Yeah. And then, of course, in the South Indian tradition, you have two things, shikakai and arappu, as you know. So I'd got those from India, and I was determined that your hair should be like really clean and wear well. And so that was a whole thing. We would I give you the bath, then I come out and dry you, and then we get really hungry by the time. So it's a bit of a challenge
Yeah.
to then run down and make sure lunch was ready at the right time. Oh, I don't know if it's a late breakfast. I forget.
I remember though, we used to start at like 8 a.m. or something and go until maybe 11:30 on some days.
Because it took a long time to dry your hair, which was very long and very thick. And on top of that, I seem to remember that you would run off at times, or it's sort of a challenge to keep your attention with the two or three towels and yeah. But it was also very special bonding moments, and I think establishing that routine, and something we always also looked forward to. It was very relaxed, and it was really a time to have fun, play in the bubble bath, and sing songs and whatnot. So I was grateful that my work afforded me that kind of, or the way I'd scaled it, afforded me all that time to spend with you. So that was great.
Me too. Well, speaking of that routine, in most traditional families, mothers do a lot of these things like hair oiling and hair washing, and many of these things related to being a woman. How did you feel about doing many of those things for me yourself?
I mean, it was all right. I always, I enjoyed many of those things in terms of like at least cooking and things like that. But I think it was kind of peculiar. It took me a while to reconcile perhaps an intellectual notion of what a male should be. I mean, I had some notion of traditional gender roles, perhaps. But peculiarly, I found I was pretty good at doing what women are supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And so then I had to sort of rethink and say that, well, so then maybe it's not that rigid. Maybe it doesn't have to be that rigid. And I also had a lot of help from women friends in my community here.
Right.
So I have about 5 or 6 sisters, I call them. They're, wives of colleagues or others. And I was just amazed and overwhelmed by the love and affection they showed you. Every birthday party, I remember, they would just magically appear and bring food, bring cakes, and there was just so much support. Just because they saw that I was trying to do this for you and that you were very special, they just came to celebrate it. And the sort of outpouring of affection and support from women in the community here, whom I call my sisters, and they're all the aunties that you know.
Yes.
It's just been very special, and I think it taught me a lot. It really made me respect that these sort of maternal and paternal instincts are not always located in one person. They're just sort of there out in the, and it comes out at different times.
I think that's a really nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
I agree. I guess related to that, many men feel like their family legacy and spirituality is carried on by their son, traditionally. But you only have one daughter, me. So what does that mean for your legacy?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think for a long time I also subscribed. I mean, there's our Hindu and Vedic literature is very rich in the emphasis on a male child carrying on the line, the lineage, particularly the spiritual lineage. It's a patrilineal system, and I won't deny that for some time I did think whether what does this mean? Is this kind of the end of my lineage or whatever? But there are two things that actually convince me of the opposite. So the first one is that empirical observation has taught me that women in Indian families, definitely in the diaspora, probably in India as well, are actually far more effective vehicles of our spirituality and spiritual traditions, not just through the fact that they carry on the culture through so many ways, right? Dance, celebrating festivals, or clothing, or rangoli, kolam, those kind of things. However you call it, I'm just calling all of that culture. And so women are the vehicles of culture, but in fact they're also the vehicles of spirituality now, because very often, I mean, like 99% of the time, they outshine the males in this department. And so I just come to believe that if this is Kali Yuga, well, this is how it is. I mean, this is women are the vehicles who are carrying forth this stuff. So let's accept it. It's empirical. It's true. It's got to be true. And then the other part of it is also that I learned that it doesn't only have to be your biological offspring who have to carry on your legacy and spirituality. That is another. So I've had, as you know, the great fortune of having a group or dedicated group of young men and women who have been involved in satsang, and you know that from probably when you were very little.
Right.
And I find them to be incredibly effective, again, vehicles of a legacy and the spirituality. Their devotion and their acceptance of the mechanism and the method by which I've tried to inspire spirituality in them has been very humbling to me. Their sincerity has been humbling, and I have zero doubt that they will be the best vehicles. I could not have asked for any better way to further whatever legacy and spirituality that I was blessed to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally see that. And I'd also like to think that the way that I have continued to live my life as I have entered adulthood is also a reflection in a lot of ways of your legacy and spirituality too. And I think, that makes me happy.
Absolutely. And I do want to say that exactly, specifically for you and me, we have a lot of conversations. You've always engaged in it. And I hope that it's always been an active engagement, a constant reflection, questioning, engaging with doubt, engaging with apathy at times, all of it, right?
Yeah.
And the joy. So I do think you've not shied away from it, and you've actually engaged with it very positively. So I feel very happy about that.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
Me too. Okay, so coming back to questions about your fatherhood.
Okay.
What were your greatest obstacles as a father, and how did you resolve them?
Yeah. So I think the obstacles, some of them fell in the easily resolvable stage, and I'll talk about those. So I think one thing is coming as as an immigrant to this country, and the way that we studied, and Nikhil and I have talked about this a little bit.
Right.
It was a very slippery slope in India in terms of, or at least that's the message we were given, that you really had to be very good at academics, particularly in a STEM field. Ideally, you had to be an engineer or a doctor in order to do well, and there were not many other career choices that were considered legit or wise or sensible. And so we grew up in a system that was pretty competitive, and also there was not much of a margin of error for failure in the academic system. So you really had to work very, very hard. And there was not much questioning of, is this the right career choice, or, they were very narrow, and it was very structured, and it was very, for instance, everybody took the same classes. When I went to undergraduate, we all took the same classes in that stream. There was not much flexibility, right? You just put your nose down, you hunkered down. Although, to be honest, I've always also confessed to you that I was an notoriously lazy student. And much of it was induced by sheer terror of the exam or fear or something like that. My studying was notoriously inconsistent.
You know what? You can't say anything about my grades.
No, I don't say anything about your... Well, so here's the paradox. I still did pretty well on the grading stuff, right? I was just being honest with you that... maybe I shouldn't have, now that I think about it. Too much honesty is not a good thing. But I thought I was kind of treating you as an equal by sharing with you that discipline in studies was not something that came naturally to me. I've given you a lot of jokes about how I'd leave things to the last minute and scramble.
Yes.
But I also hoped to imply by that still getting the grades was important. But maybe that got lost in transmission.
No, I get it.
Okay. So anyway, the challenge, the obstacle was, I know that you have a strong quantitative mind, and that I felt you were very capable of doing STEM. And I think myself and my sister, we had so much enjoyment in mathematics and physics that we really wanted to share that with you. But I recognized along the way that although you had an interest and a curiosity in it, it just didn't work out. The way your high school studies were structured, there was a lot of flexibility in how you could choose what physics and what not. And I think you did all right, but this high school was not exactly a terribly supportive place for that kind of STEM studies. And you went
Yeah.
to the high school in a different town.
Right.
But that was one of the easier obstacles. I remember trying to coach you very early on in math and stuff. And I think once you had tears and it was hard. But then we quickly regrouped, and I learned how to not be even to criticize or or even give unspoken criticism. But we learned to negotiate, and then you learned a lot. Actually, you came to me often with homework, so that was a great turning point. We crossed that obstacle.
Yeah.
And then the second obstacle was when I completely let go of the idea that even though I felt a quant and STEM mind, that you may not pursue that.
Right.
And that was harder, not because that I just wanted you to excel, but that I felt that that was a part of your intellectual capability that you could have exercised if you chose to. But you did. I mean, you built a computer once, I remember. So you still have some of that, engineering side in you.
Yeah.
And it might come back. So I'm just reaffirming for you that these skills and talents you could discover later. But it was okay. I'm completely comfortable with whatever choices you made, because as you know, I also love the humanities. I also love art and poetry and literature and sociology and psychology, and I think pursuing all those is also good. But I think the obstacle was just letting go of that, and also acknowledging that by letting go, maybe a new vista may open up for you that might be even broader and brighter and interesting than sort of my narrow expectation. So, was it a challenge? It was a challenge of letting go, and but I think it was good. That was nice. Other challenges centered around, of course, it's not easy to be parenting after divorce. There are challenges. I think your mom and I did very well overall. We actually do agree on many, 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 many things, and I'm very grateful that she was a really wonderful mother to you in so many ways, and she continues to be, and we cherish that connection. And in fact, I think the whole thing came out superbly, probably far better than I expected. And I did have a lot of anxiety in the early years that you should weather this in some way successfully and be, not be too hurt by the whole experience. But I think once I started seeing the empirical data again, that, you were happy and you enjoyed having two birthdays, and that you were so flexible and adjusting to the changes in routine at different places and all that, it started to, I overcame that obstacle. I said, okay, there's no need to be anxious because there's nothing to be anxious about. This is going very well. And so I think those were some of so a lot of it was really self-control, letting go. But you were a very easy kid to bring up, I'll say that.
Aw, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, very, very easy. And definitely one of the far more easier and fulfilling phases of my life.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sweet. Well, I do remember once saying, double the parties, double the presents.
Yes.
No problem.
Right.
So,
But also double the moves and double the.
that's true.
Yeah.
That is true. That is a more recent consequence that I am now enjoying
Yes.
greatly.
Double the everything.
Yeah. True. Okay, so I guess maybe I sort of just covered that or touched on that, but how has being a father changed as I get older?
I think I've learned a lot from you also. That's something I didn't mention probably in the earlier thing. You've taught me a lot about how to be more gentle to people, how to control my emotions, acknowledge them actually first, and then articulate my feelings politely, and arrive at compromise in a very gentle way. I mean, it was not so much us, but you pointed out in other relationships where I was maybe not being as good as I could be. So that was very nice. Growing older, I think one thing I have enjoyed is seeing you develop as a person with your own beliefs and your own principles, and reacting to situations in school and college that are uniquely your own. And you don't always agree with me, and I respect that, and I think that's great. Actually, I think that to me is the sign of an independent adult.
Yeah.
And I think I have enjoyed talking about those different points of view, being challenged, having an open mind, trying to explain my viewpoint, and trying to, and sometimes, in the beginning it may not have gone that well, but eventually we learned to have those conversations.
I think so, yeah. I think, like you said, learning to articulate my viewpoints is a real skill that I've gotten from talking with you.
Wait,
It's
yeah.
good, yeah.
And I really appreciated that you never labeled me right away. And like you never came out and said, you're ex, you're impossible, I can never have this conversation. You always said, let me think about it. And you always were very slow to start up in an opposition, but thoughtful. But you were also resolute in pointing out differences, which is important. And I think you also gave me credit for experience. I mean, a lot of our conversations would sometimes
Right.
end up with, well, I don't think you've seen all these things in life. And I think that was never meant to shut you down, but it was also an honest, at some level, surfacing of the fact that, I have spent more years on this earth circling the sun than you have.
True.
But I think you took it well. I think you've always respected that and taken it as provisionally useful, even if immediately you didn't accept what I said. So I think that has changed. So yeah, it's been wonderful. I think we're continuing to grow, and I look forward to this year and the years to come.
Me too, Dad. Okay, so this is a fun one and possibly very embarrassing for me.
Yeah.
But what is your favorite story from my childhood that best describes my personality?
So, two stories come to mind. One, when you were very young, it was probably Diwali, and we dressed you in this very pretty pavade,
Okay.
which is for our non-Tamil speaking friends. It's a skirt with a lot of gilt and stuff like that, right? It was
Right,
yeah,
with a little top, but that
blouse,
goes to the waist.
yeah. So it was in red, and it was with all the zari and gilt. So it was very beautiful. And we'd taken you to the mall for something. So it was me and my parents. And I had a cell phone, and you took that cell phone and you ran away with it. And at that age, you were very fast. You were a very quick runner, and being rather small, you could dodge people very well. And then you ran away into one of those department stores, and there was no way to find you because all the the shirts and all the clothing that was hanging was at a height that would conceal your head. And at one point I literally had to be bending down and looking for your feet somewhere so I could catch you. This feature of your running around in public places was always a great cause of great concern, especially because we traveled a lot internationally.
Right.
So at one point we had to put you on a leash so you didn't run into the security
Oh my
area.
God, I hated that leash. I still remember it.
Well, it was only once when we went to
Okay.
Turkey. It was when you were maybe 2 or 3 years old, and it was after 9/11, so we
Okay.
security had ramped up. Oh, and you did one thing once which is really, really funny. So we were at the United check-in, and they have the terminal, and it was late, and I really wanted to get on the flight.
Right.
And you hit the language selection, you hit Hebrew. And I don't know Hebrew. And so I didn't even know how to exit the thing from Hebrew. And it was so frustrating because we were late. And I wanted to get us checked in, and you hit Hebrew. I'll never forget that. Anyway,
That's so funny.
yes, to you now, but not at the time for us.
Father, you've been through a lot.
Yes, I'm not even done. There's a couple of more stories. You asked for it. What was the other one? Oh, yes. This, two more are really funny.
Okay.
So you were really young, and I tried to put you to bed in the crib. And I tried to work after that on a paper or something.
Right.
My professor work. So one of the tricks to putting you to bed, I thought, was to move so gently that once you fell asleep, I could just gently sneak away. So I used to liken this to a reversible process in thermodynamics, which is you take the system through such small changes that each change is reversible. And I would take 10 minutes to gently place you in the crib. And thinking I was done, I would turn around and sneak out.
Right.
And I would sit down at the computer, and 2 minutes later, you would have got out of the crib somehow, and you'd come and say, "What are you doing?" or something like that. At which point, all my efforts at trying to put you to sleep were not. And then finally, I think at one point, I just gave up and said, "Okay, I'm also going to sleep, so might as well. This is the only way this is going to work."
Dad, I'm just encouraging you to have a healthy bedtime.
Yes, I'm sure. And then when you were a little older, this was also concerning sleeping. So once I actually knocked off, and you had this habit of getting up in the morning and opening each eyelid of mine to see if I was awake. And let me recommend that as not a good way to find out if someone is awake. And once when I actually still was asleep, you very kindly thought that my feet were dry. And I used to have this thing called Badger Balm, which is this giant tin of olive oil balm, which is this extremely greasy.
Greasy, thick.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you kindly applied that over both my feet. And I think you used the entire tin, so my
Oh
feet,
my God.
my feet were just covered in this stuff. And I woke up and I couldn't move because I couldn't put my feet anywhere. They were full of this balm, and I couldn't put them on the sheets. So I was essentially harpooned or marooned on the bed. So
Well, you can't say it didn't come from a place of genuine concern and love, you know?
maybe. But I can't remember. I think I might have got down on my knees and then walked and got a newspaper or something and come after you. So it was a really ridiculous experience. But I mean, if I put my feet on the carpet, it would have all got giant footprints of olive oil balm. So
But
anyway,
you were never bored.
no, it
So
was
there's
never.
that.
It was never boring.
Oh boy, that's pretty iconic. It's pretty good. Okay, all right. Well, I'll ask you our last question for tonight. Any advice for future or new fathers listening in?
That's a tough one. For one thing, every kid is unique. So, I talked about the generic sort of things that I think a good father should do. But the way it kind of plays out, I think, is so dependent on the personalities of the father and the child. I think to prepare to enjoy yourself, and it can be really, it's just a wild ride. It's a blast. It's fun. It's an experience that I would not exchange for anything in my life. I would say always keep an open mind, be gentle, and you don't have to be firm too at points. I would say, if you believe a principle is being violated, and you honestly believe that, stick with it, because that learning will help your child later.
Right.
And then other than that, I would say you are entering very uncharted waters. I mean, being a first-time father, it's just an experience that's very difficult to prepare for in any way. You're going to have the sleepless nights and all that stuff. There's the physical stuff. But it's also such an opportunity for you to be an example. And so it's an opportunity for you to really rise above, like all the ways in which I was slobby and sloppy, or in every aspect, whether it be moral or spiritual or at work or at home. It's a real calling to rise above, because now you're an example for someone. And yet to have the humility to recognize you'll not be perfect, so that's all right. And I think to actually be able to share that with your child and still have them respect you is a very wonderful sort of experience, right? So both, you're trying to be the best you can, but you recognize that, you're human, and that's okay, and to forgive yourself. So that's the only way that you're also going to be able to forgive your child for the things like keep the emollients and ointments away. That's one thing I would suggest. Right. Hold on to your cell phone.
Oh boy.
Okay. Shall I add a few more, or you think we're...
I think that's probably though. When you say cell phone, was it one of those little flip phones at that time?
No, it wasn't a flip phone. It was just a one piece, but it was not a smartphone.
Like a Nokia or something.
Yes, it was a Nokia. And
Took your Nokia.
Right.
Wow. Vintage.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to interview you for the podcast. This has been really fun, and it was nice to hear about all the stories, even the ones that portrayed me in a not so flattering light.
Well, you were young, so we can forgive you for that.
Oh,
If you
thanks,
did it tomorrow, then I think that would be a problem.
Watch out.
Watch
Hide
out.
the badger bomb.
Right. So thanks, Shivani, for coming on the podcast. I'm sure Nikhil is also very happy that we finally got to do this. It was fun to chat with you, and I hope our listeners will enjoy, and I'm sure they'll give us feedback and tips on our journey ahead.
Yes, and
Great.
happy Father's Day.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks to my daughter Shivani for coming on the podcast for this Father's Day episode. Nikhil, what was your biggest takeaway from the conversation?
Wow. I'm so happy that Shivani came onto the show. She's a real natural on the mics, Shankar. You both have a wonderful and special dynamic. I took away a couple different things. First of all, I want to say I think you're really changing some hearts and minds as you share your experience with divorce and as a single father. As we've talked about before, that's really not well represented in our culture or spoken about. And so I think it's helpful to hear that. I'm so grateful that you're sharing that experience with all of us. I also really enjoyed hearing the little vignettes of your lives. You giving Shivani an oil bath, Shivani having a propensity to run away time and again, all memorable and heartfelt moments. I really loved your line, like a lamp in an undisturbed place, when you talked about the consistent, unwavering emotional support that fathers can provide. I'll definitely be thinking about that long after this episode comes out. And I gotta say, I think she asked you for a story about her from childhood, and you gave 4 or 5 stories. I laughed so hard at the Hebrew language selection story and how she would open your eyelids to see if you were asleep. I think I've seen something like that when I was young with my sister and I and our parents too. So just awesome, hilarious, wonderful conversation. What was your biggest takeaway, Shankar?
For one thing, I hope that people, fathers who are preparing for the experience will know what to do. Kids opening parents' eyelids seems to run in South Asian families.
Yes, exactly.
But seriously, I think it was an interesting contrast and complement to what your dad shared on the first podcast, the previous episode. In both content and style, they represent 2 interesting perspectives on fatherhood. And it just reveals to me the richness and diversity of this experience that is possible even within all the commonality that we share as fathers.
Yeah, absolutely. Listening to you and to my dad has given me my own ideas about fatherhood that may be relevant in my life someday. I do want to say there's something unique about the father-daughter relationship and the laughter you both shared. There's something just so sweet and life-giving, life-affirming about that. But Shankar, I wanted to ask you, I have been trying a little bit more coffee lately, and I know you're a big fan of coffee. Have you been to any good cafes lately?
Interesting, you should ask Nikhil. So what's this new interest in coffee? Maybe we can find out more in future episodes. As for me, Nikhil, I'm happy to tell you that I was at a virtual cafe, which is Northgate Cafe, a podcast that is hosted by David Tracy, who might join us here for a future episode down the line, I hope.
Yeah, it's a wonderful episode that I'd highly recommend our listeners check out. There's a lot in there where Shankar talks about culture, identity, and coaching. We'll include a link to that episode in the show notes if any of you want to check it out. And Shankar, I also noticed you've been more active on Instagram this week. Your star is rising.
Well, you caught me there, Nikhil. As you know, my Instagram superpowers are yet to manifest. Right now, they will last for as long as Shivani is in residence here. And actually, it's just Shivani who's helping me with ideas on how to use the platform better.
I figured as much, but I wanted to see if you'd take the bait with me here. As always, dear listeners, subscribe to our podcast and please leave us a review on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
See you all next time.